I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism.
I'm Stephanie Gerber Wilson, and this is Freedom Over Fascism, and welcome to number 2 live. And I have Jason Sattler with me, who is LOLGOP all over the interwebs. And we're going to talk today about maybe some hope, maybe some anger, and maybe some other things. So can you introduce yourself, Jason, and tell me what's up with what you're working on?
Sure. Yes. My name is Jason. And for a long time, nobody knew my name, and it was a lot better then. People thought I was Tag Romney at some point, but I've been doing a little GOP since 2009. Um, and in that time, I've been, writing about politics. I was a columnist at the USA Today, and blogging in a bunch of various places all over the place. And after 2024, or right at the beginning of 2024, I lost my job, and I said, I'm going to hire myself to work full time for democracy. And that's what I've been doing since. I started a group called Early Worm, which was trying to activate early news hounds like ourselves.
Mhm.
I'd become like a strike force for democracy. Did not work out. So now I've been trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I've been working on a podcast called Next Comes What, where I produce Andrea Pitcher's podcast. I think she's the most important voice in America at the time. So I was just like trying to get that out to everybody. But as part of that, we've been looking at the same research everybody else has about the 3.5% rule.
Right.
Um, it's more of a, an occurrence that in history, and there's exceptions. I think there's actually one going on right now in Georgia, where there's percentage of the population is more than that is activated. It hasn't changed the government, but historically over the last century or so, 3.5% against the population of the population rising up at a key moment. That probably is how they justify a lot of these explanations is at a key and change the government. So knowing the threat we face and know how it's going to ultimately probably, at some point or other, it's going to require the people to stand up or not stand up. I want to be a part of standing up. And one of the pieces of research we came across from Erica Chenoweth, who was one of the co-authors of the research on the 3.5% rule, was she pointed to the study that said to keep people activated, they need two things: anger and hope. Not just anger, not just hope, but both at the same time, which are tricky things to kind of connect. And then I was kind of like, well, that's I mean, I wonder if everybody hears that and goes, well, that's what I want to do, or that's what I do. And that's what I thought. That's what I do. That's what I want to do. And that's why I started this new, and also I want to do this full time. I want to work for democracy. I want to make myself unemployable in any other field, but because I'm so outspokenly anti-fascism that you wouldn't hire me because in this time period where people are being cowards, I just don't want to work with any cowards. I think there's a lot of non-cowards out there that I could work with. But I want to work with the people who see the threat we face and want to be serious about it. And that's my message to the world is I'm going to pay myself to do it. And I'm going to ask other people to support me to do it. And I've just kicked that off last week.
Well, good luck with it. I think it's a great idea. And, I've been doing this podcast as a podcast for a little over 2 years. And what I've been saying for a long time is, hope is an action, right? It gives me hope to do this because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. And then I find that it sways from hope to anger, and anger gets paralyzing. And then you go back to hope, and then you can activate a little bit. So how do you get those things to work together?
I think for me, it's about what I expose my brain to. Do you remember that documentary? This was a revelation that I had last year. That documentary about the family that lost their dad to Fox News. I'm forgetting the exact title right now. I normally know it off the top of my head. But they found in the end, so this dad, he turned on Fox News, turned on his family, turned on his history of being a hippie and liberalism and everything, and became a ditto head first, and then got into Fox News. In the end, they kind of book, they throw this in the end. The way that they changed his life is they went and subscribed him to new bits of information. And we
Mhm.
find if we're saturating, I find when I'm usually the most hopeless, I'm getting the worst information. That's my kind of either I'm getting information that doesn't take me seriously as a consumer, New York Times front page, or I'm getting news that's generally bad, and does require some processing where I then can turn to somebody who has more perspective that maybe if, there's always hope where you can understand. If you can understand what's going on there and you can make progress, if you can try to get rid of the absurdity in life and reduce the amount of absurdity, which is my quest in life is life has become increasingly absurd every single day since I think when that plane disappeared in 2014. I think that's the moment where I just kind of market everything kind of just turned into a Twilight Zone movie. It's just gotten more dystopian day after day. But I find that gives me a kind of spiritual challenge to um to make meaning out of dystopia, because people have lived with far worse, of course. Some people have taken on far worse odds and stuff like that. And um, and I think, there's man's search for meaning. It's meaning is kind of the secret power in anger, is my early theory. So I'm working with this, so
Right.
what you're finding as well.
Oh, well, a couple things. One, I think that action actually precedes hope. I do believe that. Like if you take an action, even if you don't think it's going to do anything, the action itself gives you more capacity to believe that you can make things better, as opposed to waiting for hope to come to you.
Yes.
Um, I also think there's a huge lack of imagination right now. 2 years when people are like, "Oh, is this the bottom?" No, we know what the bottom is. We've seen it before, and nobody wanted to even think about that. But now we're here, and there's a piece of me that is very frustrated because, I'm doing this work which is supposed to help people find what they want to be doing and saying and giving them tools. And then there's a piece of me that's like, this isn't going to change without a war. So I have a really hard time, staying level headed. Either, if I read too much news, I was just on Blue Sky and I was like, oh my God, like the world's coming to an end. But then if I don't, then I feel like I'm out of it. And really the whole thing is about less about who's on Blue Sky and what they're saying, and more about like reaching people who aren't on Blue Sky, who aren't reading whatever corporate media or glued to their Substack or however they're finding their news, because they're more interested in, whatever it is, makeup tutorials, which I'm also a little bit addicted to right now.
Honestly, I should be spending more time on that. And or, you know, where I'm digging more into is who can I find that's covering stuff that's not that I don't. I'm a little tired of, and I'm the worst of this. And I was kind of rose the vanguard of this in 2025. The dunks. It's all dunking. It's dunking on this and dunking on that. The people. If you have a great insight into what is going on, that's always super valuable. And I feel like those kind of, we're talking about the hope cycle. We're talking about so the action.
Mhm.
I'd say the good information and good inspiration kind of precedes action, which precedes hope. It's kind of like this continuum.
Mhm. Right.
So I try to find people who are I'm trying to look for more expertise, better information, better writing. I find that the better stuff I seek out, the better I feel, and that's a little selfish in there. But I also find like there's so many actions that we can take, and we can be focused on the right thing. And with Blue Sky and with Substack, and with everything, with all the problems with every one of these platforms, I want to look at this and I say, hey, I have access to these expert areas, and they're writing about it in real time. This stuff would take forever to get from anywhere. This work that's being done by individuals all throughout there. Be
Mhm.
connected to, it really is an amazing world in that sense. And so I think that, that's, I find the lack of imagination thing, I get, it, it, it gets scary because you kind of, certain people have been raised in the tradition where you got to expect the worst to come all the time, and the worst is coming all the time. And is this the worst is coming? Um, and I think we can, if they can be creative about it and they can imagine a world where they were making network states in the middle of Central California and they're kicking people out of their land, we can be creative about how this ends. I don't think this has to end in the way that they want it to end, or that they're going to force it to end. That's one of the things that gives me hope. I do think that there's enough braveheart, there's enough expertise, there's enough connectivity. As long as we still have these things, we have access. It's one of the little blessings of working with someone who wrote a history of global concentration camps, and she had this in my mind of what this could look like since the day after the election. We started the podcast the day after, the week after the election. And if you read Andrea Pitzer did a podcast called "How to Survive This Mess" in or mid-November. All the things that happened, she was talking about then. So I've been in your studies, you people, that have done studies about fascism, people who kind of were aware of this. It's not as surprising. It's kind of unsurprising and disappointing how unsurprising it is. I think for a lot of people, and how quick it's happened. I think the Elon Musk thing was feat of imagination. And I hate to say this in the way that 9/11 was. It was an attack that no one was prepared for and had never thought to defend against. And I think one of the reasons that the Tesla takedown was so enthralling when it first came along and to a lot of people is because it was the first kind of us launching back and being as creative as they were on the positive
Right.
end, productive end. And I think that the imagination is something that gives people hope. It's the number one. It's like the cheat code for hope. So I think that that's a huge thing. And a lot of the imagination is, it's a destructive imagination on the right with these science fiction fantasies of what they're going to do to the government now that they have control.
Right. First, can I ask
No,
all of you
I
cool
don't know if that
people?
hold.
It does, and I'm gonna get to it in a second after I ask everybody to press the heart because that helps the algorithm, I think. Um, so imagination. Yeah, I don't think any of us imagined. Oh wow, cool. Thanks, guys. Um, the Elon Musk piece, and that's kind of on us. But on the other hand, I feel like elected Democrats don't have any imagination beyond, oh, let's make sure we can work together. Like
Right.
they've had a lot of time to think about this. And there's a lot of us out here thinking about this. And why isn't, even I live in Massachusetts and, our governor Maura Healey says all the right things, but there's, people being kidnapped every day. And obviously they're focusing on the blue states at first. But there's a piece of me that's like, well, why haven't you figured out how to use the National Guard? Why haven't you been, talking with, maybe you've been talking with other blue state New England governors, but like, there seem not to be a plan, right? And our congressperson is Catherine Clark, the minority whip who has power in the Congress. And why is it like that they maybe can talk a good game, not great, and yet nothing? Really? I mean, we went through an entire 4 years before, and, they were doing a lot of things during the transition, so, like, what is it that is really holding people back from, 1, imagining how we could make this country what we've always wanted it to be
Mhm.
and never was, but also, in the reverse, what it the depths to which it can sink if no one's fighting against it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of us fighting against it, but um, we're not united. So, especially on, say, Substack, say it's become um, a platform where a lot of people are congregating. Well, a lot of those people now are like huge names, so they're getting massive audiences, and Substacks perhaps subsidizing them. They're making a huge ton of money, but they're all trying to create like community silos, and no one seems to be, or maybe they're working together up at that top level, but those of us at a slightly, lower level are kind of like, okay, well, you guys do your thing, and we're going to take over the whole space instead of trying to build a large community that's working together and not at cross purposes and not competing, and everybody's feeling everybody wants money because of course we're creators and
Sure.
we ought to be paid for our work, but like oh, thank you for ignoring the celebrities. um but nobody can afford to pay for all the things that they want to be able to do. um yeah, that's why I asked Jason to be on this. I want to start connecting the silos, connecting the people who are working on these things, because I want to share our audience. I don't want to compete with you for an audience. That's silly.
Right. And that's no competition. Believe me, you would destroy me every time. And yeah, and
No.
I find that yeah, yeah, that kind of stuff, that dynamic, and I think it ties into, I think it's similar things. I think it's incentives. So it's incentives, you have an incentive to build up a little cult of, personality on Substack. It makes a ton of sense to do that. And you have incentives, you have your governor in Massachusetts. I have my governor in Michigan, who I still, she gave us incredible things with our trifecta.
Right.
There's a lot of good, we have a lot of goodwill for Gretchen Whitmer. It is incredibly disappointed. But I'm imagining next week she's gonna be like, I accidentally did the YMCA at Mar-a-Lago. I didn't know I was at Mar-a-Lago. I thought it was Billie Jean. And so, I mean, she's a little out of sorts. And I think that their incentive kind of dynamic going on with the centrist Democrats is they are talking to rich people. And when rich people hear, you know what, I have an idea that could bring all of us together to protect your interests. And you don't even, and it could overcome the wokeism that you hate, and it could bring so much, and in AI, there's so much AI in it. You wouldn't believe how much AI this has, so like they are like, oh, crypto? Oh, yes, I'm going to start, to make fun of Trump's meme coin, but we're all going to have a meme coin. You know what I mean? Like that's the incentives. There's a lot of money flowing around, and we had this question, how did the 1930s happen? And I think in the last 6 months, we saw how that happened. I think everybody has a much better answer for that than we ever did before. It's because the elites crumble. And then the rest of us are scrambling for our own kind of, to grab onto anything. It's a little like the Titanic starts going down when the elites crumble, and you kind of have to, you're looking, everybody's looking, and they're trying to figure out which lifeboat they're on. And it's a desperate set. That's why when even Cory Booker gets up and doesn't really do anything other than set a record, people are like, okay, you guys get it in some way. You get it. Like,
Right.
yes.
Like,
That's how
use this.
I mean, I think Cory Booker did a great job. It was an incredible speech. He could, top 1.7% of, he stood up, he did all the right things at the right time, but it was the thirst for it should have said something to Democrats more. And there's needs to
Right.
be, and I think that they got that. So they're on the steps. But, I think this fight I like to focus on for uniting things. I like to focus on saving Medicaid. If you follow me and you talk to me right now, you know that I'm doing two things. I'm hawking my newsletter business, which, subscribe. There's a lot of better people subscribe. It's like I know it should all work better, but if you can do anything, if you can do something to help save Medicaid here, then I've sold you the real thing that I'm obsessed with. And this is what I'm about this week. They're doing the markups on this on tomorrow, on Tuesday. This is something that unites anyone who has a heart. And I think those are the kind of, and look at the heart, see? All the hearts,
Yeah.
everyone, it's like, everyone with the heart. So like, this is the real fight. This is the kind of stuff I feel like, and I think about this because, one thing I've taken to do with my wife, who's more motivated than I am, since actually she's more pissed, she's more intelligent, but we've been out there, we go to bridge protests, we go to Tesla takedown, because she wants to reach people that we can't reach any other way. Thinks that's that important. And I feel like that's when I go out there and I see people that I haven't seen before. The first thing I want to say to them is save Medicaid. And I
Right.
think that you find what message you want to tell people. It really helps,
Yeah. But we also have to be, I think, a little bit smarter about how we're telling, maybe not us, but maybe it's the people with the big megaphones. We'll talk about, oh, well, this reconciliation bill and Medicaid is at stake, as opposed to there is a MAGA murder budget that will kill people unless we stop it.
You make a good point there.
Right? Like
Yes.
the people for whom politics is a hobby, as well as, for whatever small amount of money we get. And let me just tell you, the difference between the top of the heap, where they get upwards of $5 million a year, and my little $5,000 a year is very large. But and this is all out there. Like, good messaging is out there. One of the problems is that we can't, that there are so many people listening to the right wing machine, and they're so good at like keeping our attention. And in some ways, it's a no win for us, right? So Stephen Miller comes out on Friday and says, "Oh, we're thinking about ditching habeas corpus." So that's what people are talking about over the weekend, which is true and horrible. Yet it is a distraction from talking about Medicaid and the MAGA murder budget, because they're both horrifying thoughts.
Yep. Well, I have a MAGA murder budget. So if you're saying it's good, I think you have good sources of messaging, and I need to get behind that, because I do think that's absolutely right. It's how do we break through the noise? How do we get people to talk about the right thing? I think I think one of the things that the whole, I mean, there's so much that goes into this. I don't have a simple answer for this, but one thing it makes me think about is, we're obsessive on the left about hypocrisy, where we think it's like criticizing hypocrisy, of like we feel like we're
They
throwing water.
couldn't give a shit.
And it's entertaining, it's crowd service. So we're sitting there all day long. I could say that, oh, you could wear a mask to this one, and that, good points, but it's not what the right understands is, if you want to understand what works in politics, is you look at anything the right does, because they never engage their critics. If they do, it's just to mock them and ridicule them. If they frame everything from the get-go. They make everything all interconnected, and they're strategic in their initiatives.
And they're funded.
And they're fun. Yes, that comes.
Funded.
Yes. That's the point where it comes for, and start going back to incentives. So if you have an incentive machine, people reward the incentive machine, and there's so much incentive on the right. The incentives on the left go up when shit becomes a disaster, and we have to save ourselves from the Republicans every 8 years, which seems to be the cycle we've doomed ourselves. If we're lucky, we can still save ourselves.
Right. Well, they break it, we save it. And somebody just wrote great language inspired by the great work of Anat Shenker-Osorio, and that is exactly where I got it. So shout out to Anat.
I am a not. I don't know what we call ourselves. The anonymous.
I'm a groupie.
Yeah. No, she is. She is someone who says it as is, and she's someone who talks about how important it is to just say the word fascism, which I think there's a lot of debate. So there's a lot of great messaging, and a lot of where it comes from. But where does it come from? It comes from a not. Occasionally ends up in the mouth of a politician, or MSNBC is very good reporting and insider information about the politics of the left in general, with some exceptional moments and some great interviews and stuff like that. But it's not what Fox News is. It's not a messaging machine. And I don't think, Maddow will venture into elevating good messages and good messengers at points, but not most of her show is even about that.
Right.
They do that. They're not paid. There's not incentive to do it. And Democrats won't sit there and watch rah shit like that, to be honest, unless it were completely done. It has to be funny. It has to be somewhat cynical. It has to be, engaging and deep. And like that kind of stuff is not the same kind of thing that happens on the Five.
No, it's more a daily show than, how people...
You can do that a half hour a week. You can't do that 24 hours a day, that the way that they live. It's
Right.
kind of trauma bonding or anger bonding, so.
Yeah. And we're kind of obsessed with the truth.
Yeah.
We like to tell the truth. We don't even like it if there's a little piece of it that isn't true. And that really puts us at a disadvantage. I mean, I can't bring myself to like straight out lie, but it really is a disadvantage. And there's only a few people out there, and your co-state resident, Pete Buttigieg, right now is one of the most amazing thinkers and communicators. I hate when people just call him a communicator, because it's not it. I've been like a supporter of his since before his presidential run, but we could learn so much if we just actually focused on what he does. Like, how does he make a connection with people he has no connection to, right? Maybe it's White Lotus, maybe it's having a toddler, maybe it's whatever, but like finds a way to make a connection. And I feel like I'm just shouting into the wind. And the more I can talk, I mean, one of the Knot's major lessons is you gotta talk to the choir to get the choir to sing, because if your message isn't heard,
Yeah.
by
Right.
definition,
What's coming back to you most of the time is, oh, you're wearing a mask for this, but you're not wearing. But I think yes, So interesting point about all this is, Anat, Pete Buttigieg, and I'll throw AOC in there, another amazing
yes,
community.
absolutely.
Whatever you think about politics, whenever this is the Democratic instinct, but I disagree on this specific issue with that person and that person, that's the left wing, instinct to kind of, to make the truth known and nuance known. But let's just say that those, amazing communicators, the best in class, all influenced heavily by George Lakoff, who should have had much bigger.
Right. Absolutely.
George Lakoff is out here still writing a living. He is I call him the Lou Reed of politics, because almost everybody who worked with him went and started a band, and everyone to listen to that. He bought his books. It's so influential. And basically all he's saying, and if you read his books, he was the most clear-headed. He's about messaging, but he's the most clear-headed on where where Republican parties are headed. In 2008, when they're on the heels with the Iraq war, he's saying they will take out democracy if they can. And he's, and they listen to him for a while. Like, it's bad enough that every once in a while they start to listen to the idea that framing really, really matters. But that's not the kind of thing that appeals to these rich people in the room. They're not going, you should read George Lakoff's, don't think of an elephant. And, we can frame these messages. We can actually convince people of things. We don't have to poll to decide where we're going to talk and what we're going to say. We can actually make things popular by believing in the right things and showing empathy. Like those kind of things. It's hard to sell, the top level people on them, especially people who are scared for their jobs and scared for their money and scared for their power.
Yeah, but there's the scared for their jobs, which I completely get. And then there's the rich people who are funding things. And um, so I pay a lot of attention to higher ed. And shameless plug, I do leadership training for higher ed professionals. So come find me if that's something that you are. But I'm watching what's going on at Harvard, what's going on at Columbia, right? And the letter that more than 600 college presidents signed saying we're not doing this shit, right? My college president from my alma mater did not sign it. I went to Claremont McKenna College. All the rest of the Claremont colleges signed. And I wrote, I was like, what are you doing? And I got, he handed me off to somebody else, and I got like this runaround and was talking to my, college friends. Were like, well, look at their donors.
Yeah.
And, some of their people believe in this stuff. Oh my God, that makes me feel so horrible.
U of M probably maybe I'm in Ann Arbor, so U of M is like, it's our local Mount Olympus, and
Mhm.
the story with our colleges, with where my wife went and her family went. Not, I didn't get in. I would be able to get to U of M, but he was part of the letter. He was going along, and then all this offer from UC, the University of Florida, which you and everybody knows is the hothouse, where they are testing all the worst ideas. And it's where Christopher Rufo isn't directly involved. It's DeSantis's project. It's basically Project 2025 for our college campus. And he got hired to go there and took his name off the letter. And just everybody, it's just, and he has completely, proven that it's not just big money. It's not just people who are high floors. It's also, there's a lot of people who got the chance to tell us what they believe, and either it's in their own ability to kind of step on necks and into heads and stuff like that, or it's just they actually believe in this stuff. So it's a really revealing moment to what's going on right now. I think that letter is actually incredibly important. I didn't know Claremont's president hadn't signed that, and that's
Well, the other four colleges have.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
Claremont McKenna has always been, and not more conservative, but more sort of balanced, but also, gets more gifts than a lot of small liberal arts colleges, and because it has more people who've made more money and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I have a high school junior, right? We're in college search mode.
yeah.
So not only have I worked in higher ed for decades, but now we're like, okay, well, where is he going to go? Why are we talking about higher ed as though it's going to be the same in 2 years as it is now? Because we don't know what it's going to look like. It's like right after I guess the first 2 years of COVID, which is what we call the pandemic. Uh, I got into a group where they're like, well, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? I was like, I can't plan like that. Are you kidding me? Like, there's pandemics, there's fascism. I have no idea. And I
Teenager.
think teenager, yeah. So I don't know. I'm thinking about the person whose name I didn't get in the chat who said embrace and find a way to live with uncertainty better. And I guess that's one of the answers, but one of the other answers is to learn how to fight against uncertainty by
Yeah, no, and this is
making things better.
yeah, the good and the bad of this kind of like this I'm torn about Substack. I think it's wonderful that like it's the place where there's the best readers and it's the best connections, the best tools, the best writers. There's there's problems with every platform, so I'm not going to use their platform to call their specific problems out any more than there's problems with using fossil fuels and everything like that. But there's also this backer culture that didn't exist. This is new in the last 4 or 5 years. It's maybe the
Mhm.
only thing to come out. Existed Patreons or patrons and stuff like that, but this turning into a kind of a blogger, which what Substack specifically has done. Um, newer thing, way tougher to make on your own as a journalist. Right as it's journalism is falling apart, and to be working at a major publication right now, you have to have a special set of skills, and said somewhat derogatory in terms of you're a systems person, you're a hierarchy person, you're maybe not the kind of person who's the best to report on fascism in the moment. So we have all these incentives rewarding all the wrong things, but this backer culture and these people who like us, who care and follow other people and are invested in this. This is different and this is powerful if we can find ways to then take that energy in and send it back out and
Right.
somehow radiate and find more people that way. I think that is one thing that gives me, if we're pulling back the things that give me hope, and because that's my shtick. That's where I would go.
I think you're right, and I think it's gonna be a matter of, I I'm supposed to actually give a presentation on how to build your audience with Substack next week. I'm part of the democracy group. It's several podcasts, um, and there's a conference, and I'm just sort of writing it and going, everything's changing this week. Like the algorithm's changing, people are joining, like everything's changing this week. I don't know how much I can say that's actually going to be accurate, but um, again, I think it comes back to you've got the people who have. Okay, Heather Cox Richardson is in a class by herself, bar none, right?
Yeah.
Bar none. But then there's, the other people who are coming on, the Jim Acostas or even the Gen Z,
Right.
Aaron Parnas, or they have hundreds of thousands of followers. So how do they get their hundreds of thousands of followers, which may or may not overlap with our, however many, I have 5,700
Right.
followers, I think, um, with yours, like, how do we bring that together? Um, and I think some people are pulling the threads together, but not quite enough. Maybe I'm just super impatient. I am super impatient.
Sure.
Maybe I'm too impatient.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, yeah, so let's go back to anger and hope. And
That's
I
it. I mean,
also,
I think I've been Substack for 10,000 years, and I have a few thousand followers, which I'm grateful for. But I think it's only because of things I've done elsewhere. So it's not anything I figured out on that platform.
well, I think the thing that got me the most followers is when I had conversations with Scott Dworkin
Yeah.
and Andrew Watkins, and that just like so like that's the cross pollination that I think really works. Um, but it can't just be our little folks like us doing it,
I know.
Writers have to be hucksters and beggars to be able to make a living. And
Yeah.
as a patron of y'all, I really hate it. Yeah, we hate it too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the people who have figured this out, I think that there's a kind of, you know, I have a different view of magic since J.K. Rowling has kind of revealed herself to be. Whereas, like, I think it's all inherently evil. Like the people who figure stuff out, they know something that I'm never going to know, and I'm never going to figure it out. So all I'm going to try to do is do the best stuff that I could do related to the things that matter, the thing that matters the most. Because um, I don't have the skill where, I mean, maybe at times where I don't know how anybody figures this out of like how to make this heard. I know that there's only, what you're talking about is it's all volume. So if you're louder, you always seem smarter because there's more people who agree with you, and there's more people hearing you. So yeah, I think that strategy of reaching up and people kind of pulling up more. I think that's the podcast way, and I'm sure that'll start happening more in Substack, right? But I don't. Yes, I'm not a native, so I can't speak to it.
But what is a native, really?
Yeah.
Um, so back to anger and hope. How do you connect the two?
Well, I think that is this the only purpose? So we're talking about making meaning, making meaning of anything. What's the point of being angry? And for angry, this is stuff I'm learning from therapy, having a little girl, and trying to confront things in myself. Anytime anger comes up, it means something. So it's important. Anger is important in the sense that either you're righteously, aggravated against horrible wrongs and things that, kind of anticipatory wrongs and things that we see coming and trying to stop in real time and scream like a thunder. But, in your own life where you overreact to things or you get defensive and stuff like that, there's usually a message. There's usually a lesson to be learned in there. There's usually something to be done, an action to be taken, inspiration. So that's how it connects to me in the sense that if I'm angry about it, I still care enough where I can do something about it.
So what's the point where you think paralysis sits in? Is that anger? Is that fear? What is that?
Yeah. 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 I think paralysis is I'm a little overactive and copying up to be as an expert on paralysis. I think there's a kind of a paralysis of focusing on the same things over and over and over and over, like doing there can be a paralysis of work and running your gears and stuff like that. And I do think a lot of that is a lack of connection to reality, to people, to what's going on around you and stuff like that. I think that your answer that you kind of had the question is probably better than anything I would have came up with. It really is trying to connect to the world around you and finding ways to do that with other people. I
Right.
think that's a challenge.
Probably in person is better.
Yeah, you use the hope as a discipline, where it's like Miriam Kaba said something similar to, but this other thing is that your community is anti-fascism, any kind of community, any finding ways to be together. So I'm trying to find that, in ways. I am a natural loner. I'm sure most of you watching this, I think, are natural introverts and natural loners. If you're an introvert and you know it, don't do anything.
Or
So,
introverts unite, but
yeah,
separately and on our own time.
right. It was like, so I think that finding ways to be less introverted, in helpful ways is great. And, that's one of the things, to speak to a little bit. One cheat code is having a kid, because it forces you to be in the world. Because you're like, I'm teaching you to be in the world. If I'm not in the world, then am I really teaching you anything? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
true. But my friends are still the friends from when my 17-year-old was in kindergarten and with the kids that were in his class. And
I
as you
you're
get older, that opportunity shrinks more unless you're an extrovert. So,
yeah.
uh, and if there's a pandemic in the middle, then you're fucked.
Weeks and
But
hours. No
yeah,
pandemic.
no
No change.
pandemic, and keep up with the school friends, parents. But
Passes on pretty quickly, so we can go back to being introverts again. Let's make that the goal. Let's do that.
yeah, let's do that fast, and then we can. y- uh,
No,
I remember during the pandemic, I was on Zooms all the time, and people I would know would be like, "You're just sitting at home hiding." I'm like, "I'm talking to people all day," like there. Some great things came out of it, right? Me sitting in Lexington, Massachusetts, was talking to people from all over the country as of
right.
now. So
It's the backstory of the Jetsons that we never got quite. So where did they get these TV phones from? And it turned out there was this pandemic in 2020, and then we just decided,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, I haven't thought about Jetsons in a long time. But so is there any, it's been a little bit rambly, but I think the best conversations are, is there anything you want to feel like we didn't talk about that we should have?
um, let's see that's I hope that everybody is caught up on this issue of the data suck that's going on, and this idea of the untold story, mostly of with so much terrible things, so many things happening. 1,400 kids getting HIV a day because Elon Musk killed PEPFAR. Bill Gates called him out personally for that. Took a long time. Speaking of the elites being slow to kind of step up, a lot of terrible things happening. But this what's happening to our data and what they want to do with our government. It's you talk about things that are antithetical to what the founders wanted. A few things that they were right about. we're very right about, freedom of religion, habeas corpus, due process, the Fourth Amendment, the rights to our papers to be secure, our digital papers are being weaponized against us. They want to use this with not just AI. I will add the word that I use when I have to talk about AI or any product that Elon Musk is making at this point in history is sloppy AI. And it's worse than just it. If it worked, it would be bad enough. But it's like the absurd, it's like Kafka AI, where it works just enough to be taken seriously and then fucks up all the time in egregious ways that make no sense, that can't be fact checked. The idea of combining these amount of big data that has been coalesced in our government. One thing conservatives over the last 20, 30 years were right about is our government is too big, knows too much about us for all these reasons. There was safeguards built into the systems, and we see the last 6 months have been kind of a tour of the things that we did right that have been torn apart. Because everything we did right, they are tearing apart right now. All of that stuff that was protecting our data, it's gone. And they're doing things, this is where their creativity is going into. They're imagining ways this can be used against us. And then it's going to be like Google search, where it's just, at first it seems impressive and overwhelming and then just gets worse every day. And you're just like, what am I drowning in? And why does my life look like this? And this stuff starts to happen very slowly. So it's not something we can make a ton of, I focus on Medicaid and saving Medicaid in the MAGA murder budget, because that's one thing we have the most. If I were going to say to people, what is the thing we're going to have the most effect on in our society? But there are a lot of things that we as early adopters, people who pay attention to the news, we could do informing to our friends about. And one of the things that doesn't get enough sense is the way that our data is being weaponized against us. First, under the false premise of that immigration is so terrible, there's an emergency that we need to be targeting people. So justifying everything, all these horrors in there, and then building this pantacapon, or whatever the word is to describe this, this big brother, prison eye on us.
Right. I find it so it's being weaponized, and it's going to be used to monetize also, which is horrifying. It feels like slipping into a surveillance state. The thing that kind of puts me in awe is when you look back at George Orwell and 1984 and Margaret Atwood with A Handmaid's Tale, and probably innumerable other authors and creators. They got it really freaking close to right. And in how many decades ago? I find that really horrifying, Like, maybe it was something that we should have all paid more attention to, but in a country of 350 million, how can you? I don't know. So I think focusing Medicaid, Social Security, which
SNAP is also, I talk about Medicaid a lot because there's just more people affected, but SNAP food stamps is what, also, there's talk today that this bill may fall apart because what they have directly done, and then Republicans are never the battered. One thing Paul Ryan used to be good at was legislation. They put together the tax cuts for the rich and the cuts for the poorest in the same bill. Seems to be almost falling apart right now. That was the big, beautiful bill. That's probably the key words you've been hearing Trump talk about. That he was trying to do that because he doesn't understand how people vote and what gets people to what he understands a lot more than he did the first term. I don't like to diminish him or kind of mock down, because enough people are doing that and whatever. If you think he's a big dolt and he's done all this and you got to the verge of fascism, then and then what does that say about me? Because
well, I think it's people like Stephen Miller and Kash Patel and all those horrible people who are now in charge. I mean, I don't know what his cognitive state is, frankly. It probably doesn't matter, but
since he became a birther. And, I think that like he has been in the same kind of headspace and getting away with every bad thing he can for 11, 12 years. He's older, he's aging like all of us. And I mean, we get to debate about how bad he is, but one thing he's terrible at, I think everyone agree on, is designing legislation and getting people to vote for things. He has no legislative. That's why he does all these things. He just doesn't care how it works. It's one reason, that they like him, is because then he's easy to push things on, for the donors and stuff like that, because he doesn't give a shit about this process. He's like, give me one big signing ceremony, then I can do another big bill in January. that's all he thinks about, So,
Right.
so that's all kind of falling apart. But the dynamics will be the same. It's tax cuts for the richest to murder the poor. I think that's the place we can stop some of that. We still can. And I want to stress that we can still stop some of that. There's a lot we can't stop. We have to depend on the courts. That depends on culture and society, how much we push back and a lot of elements. But the one thing that people have the most directness built to reflect our opinion still somewhat is these bills that are working their way through Congress.
Right. So yeah, everyone, let's get on the phone and talk to our people about rejecting the mega murder budget, and um and keep talking, and keep, getting together and forming communities and reaching out and getting rid of the silos. I think that's where it's at. And maybe getting it outside once in a while, maybe.
Thank you so much for breaking the silos and talking to me.
Well, thank you for coming on. And thank you all for coming and joining us. This is really, really exciting to me to see that we have 95 people on, because I always imagine that nobody is paying any attention whatsoever, and 95 of you are. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Please subscribe at www.freedomoverfascism.us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,